like 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed were made to talk using interrogation techniques in secret CIA prisons overseas. But do the proposed restrictions on how unlawful competence may be questioned mean that the next high-level Al-Qaeda operative captured won't give over his secrets? Joining me this week on the panel, OpinionJournal.com editor James Taranto, as well as Wall Street Journal editorial board members Kim Strassel and Rob Pollock. Rob, to you first. Can we break the next KSM?
I'm afraid not, Stuart. I think most Americans would be shocked to learn that according to the new Army Field Manual, detainees in Pentagon custody get better treatment than common criminals would get in an American police station. They can't even have a good cop, bad cop routine done on them. Now, as for what the CIA is allowed to do to, the so-called high-level Al-Qaeda detainees, the rules are unclear. But frankly, the climate of fear that's being created by these debates on Congress, particularly the proposed language from McCain, which wouldn't really say what they can and can't do. I think what that means is there's not going to be any more aggressive interrogation techniques.
Is waterboarding out, both for the Army personnel and for the CIA?
I think for now, especially if the McCain language passes, waterboarding is out. Yeah.
What we have too, we just found out that there are CIA officials who are buying insurance from the government, CIA interrogators, because they are so uncertain about the techniques that they're using, whether they're legal or not, that they've bought this insurance in case they're ever sued for what they've done to the detainees.
There is therefore a chilling effect on all forms of interrogation just about that are likely to be effective.
Yeah, just as Victoria said, we need legal clarity as to what the interrogators can do. We owe that to the men and women who are defending America in this very important way.
Isn't that what the president wants? Legal clarity?
Yeah, he wants legal clarity, and McCain basically wants to leave the language vague and just say, well, we don't like torture. Well, what does that mean in practice? Vague language means there's not going to be any aggressive interrogation.
And the idea that the Geneva Conventions protect terrorists is really an outrage and an abdication of responsibility on the part of our leaders. The whole point of the Geneva Conventions is that they're reciprocal. Nations agree when they fight wars to fight according to certain rules of civilized behavior. These terrorists don't agree to abide by any rules. They wantonly murder civilians, including women and children. So this is like saying, your wife is being attacked by a mugger, and you say, well, honey, I'll defend you, but I'm only going to do so consistent with the rules of professional boxing. It's just crazy.
And beyond that, it seems to me there's a sort of total moral confusion at the root of this debate. I mean, how can it possibly be moral to blow an enemy to bits with a Hellfire missile, but not be moral to capture that enemy and sort of question them in an aggressive way to get information that could save thousands of lives?
Doesn't the Geneva Convention say that if you sign it, your opponent does not sign it and does not act within its terms? That does not absolve you from acting within the terms of the convention itself.
The Geneva Conventions explicitly say that certain rights and privileges are not owed to combatants who don't fight according to the rules of war. Basic unlawful combatants are not owed these duties.
And when you blur the lines between them, what message are you sending? You're basically saying to these guys, go out and do your worst. Blow up as many people as you can. Think of the most heinous atrocities you can visit on people, and it's okay because we won't touch you when we get a hold of you.
What did the Supreme Court say on this issue?
Well, the Supreme Court said that something called Common Article 3 protects these terrorists. This was just a legal error. Common Article 3 is supposed to apply to civil wars, not to international wars.
And it was supposed to apply to people who aren't taking part in combat. I mean, it was a very bizarre legal judgment.
Let's move on to Guantanamo Bay. James, you visited recently.
I did, and the thing that struck me the most was how much what we hear about it is distorted and false. For example, we keep hearing that there is no due process. Well, let me give you one example of how much due process there is. In 2004, the Supreme Court decided a case called Hamdi versus Rumsfeld, and it said that if a detainee is a U.S. citizen, he's entitled to what's called an Article 5 hearing to review his enemy combatant status. Well, Hamdi, the plaintiff in that case, ended up being released and renouncing his citizenship. But the military decided to give everybody at Guantanamo an Article 5 hearing. They've all had one now except for these 14 new arrivals. They didn't have to do that. That was they did that. In addition, they have the equivalent of a parole hearing every year to determine if they can be released consistent with U.S. security. The Supreme Court said they can file for habeas corpus, and almost all of them have lawyers. And the only reason that these war crimes trials haven't gone forward is because Osama bin Laden's bodyguard was able to use our appellate courts to challenge the legality of the proceedings.
I don't know why I'm smiling. Let me throw this on the table. Is Senator McCain, in opposing the president's proposals, setting the groundwork for a bipartisan approach to the presidency in 2008? Rob Pollock.
Well, again, I think most Americans would be outraged if they understood, what the consequences of what McCain is proposing.
But he's got the moral high ground because he was tortured.
Look, but he's proposing a system where we won't be able to do any aggressive interrogations to protect Americans, and he's proposing, as far as the military tribunals go, that we have a system where you can't use classified evidence, which will be necessary when we're dealing with detainees.
It's also unfortunate here that, I mean, John McCain, look, everyone has a lot of respect for what John McCain went through, but he, of all people, should be making the distinction between people like himself who fought by the rules of war and should have been granted all the rights and privileges, and people who do not fight by the rules of war.
And McCain was tortured by the North Vietnamese, who were signatories to the Geneva Convention and decided they weren't going to abide by it.
What do you think the Republican Party in the primaries for 2008 will make of Mr. McCain's position on this issue?
Well, I hope they hold him accountable for it.
Any other comments?
I think we're already seeing Giuliani is ahead of McCain in the early polls, and I think that's because a lot of the Republican base understands he's weak on precisely these kinds of issues.
All right, when we come back, low prices at the pump may mean better chances for Republicans in November and better chances for